And welcome again, everyone. I'm really excited for what is bound to be a great discussion on the relationship between state arts agencies and the travel and tourism industry. As our field continues to evolve, navigating these kinds of cross-sector partnerships is especially relevant, now more than ever. But before I introduce the panelists, I want to take a brief moment to talk about the landscape of state arts agencies synergizing with travel and tourism, as well as other partnerships. As some of you may know, NASA's January Learning Series session featured the ways state arts agency programs are collaborating with non-arts agencies working to improve public sector outcomes. What became clear from that conversation, as well as the year-long research NASA conducted on cross-sector strategies, is not just that the arts are uniquely positioned to provide value across sectors. What is also clear is that while these relationships can take time and effort to form, the expertise, connections, and deep knowledge base of state arts agencies can be leveraged alongside other partners to solve community challenges in innovative ways. Partnerships with travel and tourism is a key example. Often, state arts agencies in the travel and tourism industry find natural partnership in the creative economy. Collaborations between state arts agencies and state tourism bodies can help states promote their distinctive cultural assets and create synergies between the creative industries and the travel and hospitality sectors. These partnerships can help strengthen the economic vitality of states while also boosting visibility, audiences, and revenues for local artists and cultural institutions. There's a positive feedback loop. The arts drive tourism, and tourism broadens audiences. What's more, synergies between state arts agencies and travel and tourism can also strengthen the fabric of communities. Cultural tourism, for example, offers unique opportunities for communities to showcase the rich tapestry of culture and celebrate their heritage and traditions. State arts agencies are also actively involved in cultural celebrations, including the National Folk Festival in Mississippi, DC World Pride, and the anniversary of Santa Fe, New Mexico being designated the first UNESCO creative city in the United States, just to name a few. Of course, this is not to say there are not challenges. Like all relationships, cultivating these partnerships takes time and attention. And I hope today we can discuss some strategies for what's worked, what hasn't worked, and ways to sustain these mutually beneficial relationships into the future. But before we do, I want to introduce our three speakers today. With us is George Sugros, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Arts Board, Gary Gibbs, Executive Director of the Texas Commission on the Arts, and Tony Manfredi, Executive Director of the Nevada Arts Council. And George, let's start with you. Can you give an overview of how you work with the tourism department? And can you talk about how the organization of your department in Wisconsin affects your relationship with travel and tourism?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. Hope everyone can hear me. Wisconsin committed to cultural tourism at the beginning of its establishment of the Governor's Council on Tourism. So back in 1987, when the council was created, two positions were added automatically to that group. Otherwise, the rest of the group is appointed by the governor. But the two positions were the executive director of the Arts Board and the executive director of the State Historical Society. So the acknowledgement of cultural tourism was right at the beginning. And so the Arts Board has had a place since 1987 on that council. But then things became even more connected. So I joined that council in 1996, 97, when my predecessor left. So I've been on the council for that long and was meeting with our colleagues on the council for many years before 2011, when our budget was severely cut and our move was made to the state agency, so the Department of Tourism. And so when I say move, we've never really defined what that means. We're not attached, we're not embedded, we're not a program of, we are still the Arts Board, because those who have the responsibility to our work is still the 15-member board known as the Wisconsin Arts Board. And that became really important as we established how we work together with tourism. So right from the very beginning in our time with tourism, the relationship with the tourism directors have been strong. And each one of them, prior to us moving to tourism or after, have believed in the arts and culture fundamentally, as well as understanding them as creative economy businesses. So we never had the challenge to talk to those folks about tourism and the arts in any way other than them saying the arts are important and they are good business. So that's a wonderful thing to have had all along. When we came together at first, part of the relationship was we had to understand and define the two different organizations. Tourism markets, the Arts Board develops. If we don't do our work developing communities and programs across the state, they've got nothing to market. And so that's helped to differentiate how we approach the universe. And we've actually been an important partner in helping our community understand how to interact with tourism. So for example, when somebody writes a grant to the Wisconsin Arts Board, they're talking about how they're going to save the world, how they're going to make their community a better place. When they're writing a grant to the Department of Tourism, they're saying, we need to get heads in beds. We need to be having economic impact beyond our programming, but to the community at large. And so the Arts Board and its staff have been able to help arts organizations learn to speak the language of tourism. Just a couple other thoughts. One is that in 2023, the Arts Board celebrated its 50th anniversary. And right from the get-go, the Secretary of Tourism said, we're going to turn our very successful Governor's Conference on Tourism and make the arts the focus of that coming Governor's Conference. So Arts Board, let's work together to make something happen. And we did. So we brought in the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts to speak. We had arts performances throughout. We had artists in residence, and we worked on breakout sessions with them. To say it was successful would be an understatement. And of course, the Secretary of Tourism came to us right away afterwards and said, we need to do this again. And I said, sure, not next year, but coming somewhere down the line, we can absolutely do that again. And so the arts and tourism in Wisconsin work really well together. And we could talk later on about where I think there's great need for improvement, but I think that sets the table for Wisconsin.
Thanks so much, George. Gary, what about you? Can you give an overview of how you work with the tourism department?
Sure. Ours is actually in statute that the Office of the Governor's Economic Development and Tourism Office is the lead. And we have a memorandum of understanding with the Texas Historical Commission, Texas Commission on the Arts, Parks and Wildlife, and the Texas Department of Transportation. And we're required to meet once a year. The executive directors of all of those agencies are required to meet once a year and come up with a tourism plan to avoid duplication of efforts. Each of the agencies also has a staff member that we designate as our tourism liaison, and they meet quarterly to discuss different aspects of tourism. Again, the governor's office is the lead on this. And the other unique thing about our tourism efforts is that the governor promotes Texas as a tourist destination internationally. We focus on just in-state tourism, so to other Texas communities. George talked about 2011. We all remember that was a bad financial year for almost all state arts agencies. And that year, we lost all of our marketing dollars and have never regained them. So our role in the tourism effort is to create product, as George mentioned as well. And so that's our contribution. And we make sure that they always know what's going on around the state in the arts world, and they use that for promotion.
Thanks, Gary. Tony, you want to tell us about how you work with the tourism board?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see you all. I think 2011 must have been the year. That is when the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs was established in Nevada, and bringing together the Travel Nevada Department, the department that really focuses on international tourism, similar to what Gary was saying, included the Nevada Arts Council and our state museums. At that time, it also included what was then known as the Indian Commission, that has since separated and is now its own agency. But we have been a part of that department since 2011. In my 8 years at the agency, there's been I think a real shift between the Travel Nevada component of that really being the big driver and the key focus, to much more integration between the Arts Council and our state museums, as support for that international traveler. But also, as Gary said too, we are really focused on that local traveler too, finding destinations between, going to our rural communities from our metro communities, really getting out and experiencing Nevada in ways that they may not have thought about. I think too, our current director is such a great advocate of the arts and really sees and understands. And I've certainly done, a fair amount of telling our story and showcasing how the arts are a real driver of cultural tourism, and making sure that we're helping to create authentic experiences that are really built for the communities that they live in versus just doing some type of thing for travelers to come and visit. I think that connection, I think George had mentioned this too, around community development, really important that the community is engaged in this work. And so we help bring some of that perspective to the table, along with the heads and beds, which is already previously described, and the importance of the tourist to Nevada. It's our number one industry by far. And certainly we are reliant on it. Majority of those folks come to Las Vegas, certainly. But every year around September, Labor Day, the week before that, the state's fourth largest city develops with a little festival called Burning Man. So if there ever is an idea of how the arts can drive people to a location in the middle of nowhere with no services, there's a great example.
Thanks for that, Tony. Want to stick with you for a sec and talk about, you touched on this a little bit, but the interests of tourism and travel, how they might converge or diverge with state agencies, and how you might navigate any potential tensions.
Yeah, sure. So the merging is, when I first began, one of the things, and I'm born and raised in Reno, which is up in the northern part of the state. And so I grew up, and really close by is a smaller city called Virginia City, which was certainly known for gold and silver. At the time, was the state's largest city at a important part of its history. And it was always right close by, and has this preservation aspect of it that was what the Old West was like. And what I took for granted was, oh, that's Virginia City. I've seen it many times, done field trips up there as a kid. But then realizing, once I got into the tourism department, that this was a real gem and a true international destination for people all over who want to experience what the West, that kind of sense of the cowboy West, I guess, the cowboy culture West was like. And I didn't realize that, or maybe I took it for granted. Let's put it that way. And so, looking at that, like, oh gosh, I guess there's preservation up there. There's a wonderful opera house that is gone through preservation. They receive a grant from us to do some really great work. And so seeing all of that developed up there, and the draw was this really great connection for me of like, oh gosh, all these things that are really unique experiences across the state. And I know all of you have many of these in your communities too. People want to see them and experience them. And I think tapping into that and making sure that we're good stewards of these places, that we are preserving what we can preserve, and certainly telling the right stories of that too, and maybe all of the stories that could come with that, good and bad. So I look at that as a responsibility that we bring to the table. And I think, again, some of the challenges that may come, or maybe a few of the challenges are communities that aren't, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, not really working within themselves to determine, is this a good idea? Is the community around this? Many of our small communities in particular people have moved out there for that reason alone. They don't want tourists. They don't want to have a lot of people coming around. So you have to be really careful that, and I think we've done a great job within our tourism. And I always love when, I'm sure many of you have experienced this as well, when people start telling you what you've been kind of encouraging them, the ways to think, when they start telling you, hey, we need to make sure that this is built for the community. It feels good that they're looking at it that way, because the last thing that we want to do is develop something that harms or hurts a place, versus helps support, the economic vitality that tourism and certainly the arts can bring.
Yeah, I really like the point. The deep connections to community, I think, is key there. George, what about you? How do you navigate, where interests converge or diverge or any tensions?
Yes, so one of the key examples is the work that we do with the regional tourism specialists, 4 or 5 of them around the state over time. Just their knowledge of what's going on the ground, our knowledge also of what's going on, introducing each other to different partners and finding out ways that we can be of service, whether it's our connection to information and resource or their connection to marketing resources that our folks would not know about. So we invite them to town meetings that we do so that we can introduce them to the arts constituency, because you may not be surprised to learn they don't always overlap. Another example of how we've converged is when we came to tourism, one of the ways they wanted to note that the Arts Board had arrived was the creation of Governor's Award for Arts, Culture, and Heritage. And at that moment, you might have been surprised that any arts, culture, or heritage person would want to apply for something called the Governor's Award after the governor had just cut the Arts Board so significantly. But in reality, at that time and throughout time now, it's actually the leading number of applicants from that first time all the way through today, because arts organizations know that this is a great way to be recognized. And our board chair is on this call today, and he has, as a stalwart, reviewed all of those applications over time. So needless to say, that's another way we help in getting through the applications for the governor's awards. And then I'll just touch on this and maybe we'll circle back, but at this moment in time, with all the challenges that are going on nationally, our tourism secretary, as a member of the cabinet, is a great conduit between us and the governor and us and the legislature, as people wonder what's going to happen with the National Endowment for the Arts or what's happening with the biennial budget going forward. So that's been a really important thing. And it's relationships. We if we didn't mention this, we sit inside the tourism offices, so we can walk outside the office if people are not remotely working that day and catch up with anybody on the tourism staff that we would need to touch base with. So I think I'll leave that there.
Thanks, George. Gary, what about you?
A couple of things. One, our partner, the Texas Cultural Trust, produces every biennium the State of the Arts report that looks specifically at the economic impact of the arts in Texas. And they have a whole section devoted to cultural tourism. And I found that legislators in particular, they understand tourism better than they understand arts grants. And so I talk a lot about the economic impact and the fact that a cultural tourist spends more money, stays longer than any other type of tourist that there is. And they seem to understand that, and I've been successful in getting money then, grant money, for our cultural districts program, where one of the areas that we fund in the cultural districts program is to create arts events that will attract cultural tourists. And we support those with our largest grants, up to $250,000 for those kinds of things. And I'm then able to highlight that, we supported this event and this cultural district, and the report that the grantee sends back shows this many people came and stayed, this many people had hotel rooms, this many people traveled more than 50 miles from our venue. So those are very helpful statistics to have. The maybe problem that happens when you have successful cultural districts, it tends to lead to gentrification and higher property values and things of that nature. So there can be some conflict with the local community and this kind of cultural tourism attraction that you're trying to build. So, and I haven't quite figured out how to balance all of that yet.
George, please.
So I just wanted to piggyback on Gary's notion of the economic impact. The BEA numbers, the Bureau of Economic Analysis numbers, for Wisconsin say that we're a $12.4 billion industry here in the state. The billion with a B is really important, but it's all the more important because it actually outranks the outdoor rec industry in Wisconsin. And if you know anything about Wisconsin's tourism, it is about outdoor rec. And so the fact that the BEA numbers in arts and culture outstrip outdoor rec is something as a point of pride, but B, as a point of lifting up, especially for those who don't think about the arts and culture as part of the tourism product, and say, no, in fact, it is an important, thriving industry that needs attention and care, just like outdoor rec.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets to my next question, which is, how important is building the case for the arts with your travel and tourism colleagues, and how do you maintain their engagement with the arts amongst other areas of tourism, like you're saying, like these outdoor activities or sports, for example, is another big one. Feel free to jump in.
So as far as that goes, back in the day, and this is a long time ago, the tourism department ran an ad that had a picture of American Players Theater, and with the tagline, "Drama so great, even your husband would go." So part of the reason for having that ongoing conversation is not only to lift up the arts into the messaging, but help with the messaging and how it relates. It's also a part of, because I don't know about your agencies, but in our agency, the brand is so important. And so figuring out how to remind and gently cajole and make sure that the arts are featured in the brand and in the messaging, it becomes very important, especially given that, and our board chair knows this, having sat on the marketing committee for years, when an ad goes up and you see a body of water and the audience knows the difference between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River and is upset if one gets more time in that ad than the other, well, you can imagine if there isn't an image of an arts and cultural event. And then if it's simply an urban arts and cultural event versus a rural versus et cetera. So it's really important for us to keep nurturing the relationship so that the brand is enveloping the arts and culture in it.
Tony and Gary, how important is building that case? And do you want to talk about, how to maintain engagement with the arts in other areas of tourism too?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Gary. Yeah.
It's been it hasn't been an issue for us here. I mean, that's one thing that the arts field brings to a marketing focused agency is we have great pictures of stuff, of art or festivals or dance or I mean, you name it. And so they rely on us to provide that kind of content for them that they then market. And Texas is, I mean, many of you probably have a very specific idea of what Texas is all about. And the image that we have across the world is really one that the agents, that the tourism partners try to capitalize on that kind of cowboy culture, but also shock you with all the other amazing things that are going on in the state. And so the arts are one of the main tools that they use to show that we have world-class ballet, opera, symphony, theater, I mean, you name it, folk arts, and the fact that Texas is so large and so diverse that you can go to the Rio Grande Valley and have a completely different experience than Dallas-Fort Worth. So that's where we assist them in that. We participate every year in Travel Week. There's always 1 week that the travel industry sets aside to promote travel. And so we will promote that on our social media. We've had events in the past to celebrate that. So that's kind of the way it works here.
In Nevada too, it's important certainly to build the case or continue to build that case. I think in many ways, Nevada has had this kind of foundation of arts and culture for quite a while. I mentioned Virginia City and the Opera House up there. You know, certainly, and Nevada is, for many of your states, pretty young, really, in comparison. We were established during the Civil War. So our history is much younger, but Reno was Las Vegas before Las Vegas was Las Vegas, and everyone was coming there. There was a lot of foundational culture, a really, really strong foundation of arts and culture that was built here in Northern Nevada. And then now you look at Las Vegas and, you know, arguably the entertainment capital of the world in many ways. And so, and in between, you have all these really unique rural communities that have their authentic experiences and are part of the history of the state. Certainly, a lot of it is connected towards mining and things that people would do, but they all have their place. Some much stronger than others. But in what's interesting, what I found really interesting is the idea of including arts and culture, and because we work with a lot of the rural partners through Travel Nevada, they put together a conference called Rural Roundup, where the rural communities are all coming, their travel entities are all coming together, and they're really wanting to get more, actually some of them have some, but they're wanting to include arts and culture in their plans. We have a program called Destination Development that tourism put on, where a tri-county place, which normally you would think from a tourism standpoint, they wouldn't want to be competing with each other at all in tourism, but they've actually gone, you know, bound together. It's Virginia City, Carson City, and Minden-Gardnerville area in Northern Nevada. They've come together and they want to make this arts and culture corridor. So they've looked at utilizing arts and culture as a real driver to help bring the traveler through those 3 destinations in one trip. And that to me is something that's pretty new in my time in watching communities. Instead of competing against each other, they're kind of galvanizing together to broaden that experience. And that's pretty exciting to see. But there is a lot of appeal in these communities to include the arts and culture in their plans. And then I think, Sean, you'd mentioned sports, and just to say this really quickly, Las Vegas is now has a number of professional sports teams, and certainly many people, you're seeing audiences of more visiting teams coming to fill those stadium seats than locals at times. And one, I think what's really fascinating for me to see is how these sports teams are helping build culture within Las Vegas, which frankly has struggled with this as a large community of transient population. So that's really interesting to see how we can tap into that from the Arts Council side, but also from tourism, but to see how we can use those sports communities to build that sense of community there. But 2, looking at these, a lot of people want to say, hey, our team's playing in Vegas, we're going to go and we're going to spend a whole lot more time there. Not only, you know, go to the game, but we're going to go to the Sphere, and so we're trying to get our arts organizations to tap into that and partner a lot more and say, use this to your advantage. You're bringing in people from all over the country and all over the world. Tap into partnering with some of these sports entities instead of kind of trying to compete against them. Tap in and figure out how you can build ticket packages or other ways to work with them to capitalize on those visiting travelers that are coming in to support their team.
George, Gary, Wisconsin, Texas, big sports states. I was wondering if you also want to talk about any of those kind of partnerships.
Of course, sports are huge here. I happen to be a big sports fan myself, but the data shows that more people attend arts events than sporting events. And when I share that information, people are always taken aback, because you think of, these big stadiums where the Cowboys play, or Houston plays, but it's maybe what, 7, 8 games a year, and you have literally thousands of arts events taking place weekly in the state. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for sports, but again, the economic impact is much better with the arts than it is with sports.
Well, in Wisconsin, in the next 3 days, you might hear a few things about sports, because the NFL draft is in Green Bay. And needless to say, the community had to figure out how to host everyone. And when I say community, I mean the region, everywhere from Green Bay to Milwaukee and beyond. And so arts events just stood up, exhibits, performances, etc. And they're going to be part of that. I mean, think about it. To your point, Gary, that if you go to a Cowboys game or a Packers game or a Bucks game, go Bucks. What you have is a situation where if you remove the music and the dancers and the visual things that are going on and the media things that are going on, it would just be a game, right? So when we think about this, you're absolutely right. The arts are more economically important, but they are also so embedded in everything that goes on that that's what makes it an event. The game is just a game in the end, but all the rest of it makes it into something. So,
and if you've never been to the Cowboys Stadium in Dallas, it's filled with contemporary art.
True. In Madison, we have a Chihuly in the Kohl Center. So, that's also a very true point. But I thought you were going to invite us to your box at the Cowboys Stadium, Gary. Oh, that'd be great.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about, outside of state tourism boards and departments, if any of you work with other kind of organizations, like other tourism organizations. What about you, Gary?
Yeah, we do. It's called, they keep changing their name. I think it's called Travel Texas now. It used to be the Texas Travel Industry Association. It's the professional trade organization for all travel related, theme parks and outdoors and sports and anything that could be related to travel, the hotel industry, the restaurant industry. They have an annual conference every year that I've spoken at before. We have a presence there. They advocate for our legislative appropriations. They have lobbyists that work on our behalf as well, to support the work we do. They conduct something called Tourism College in conjunction with one of the universities here. And I always send my staff member to that tourism college. It's kind of like introduction to travel and tourism. So we partner with them in several different ways and are active in their events.
Tony, what about Nevada?
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit of that earlier. Our regional and territory tourism partners, for example, Visit Carson City, and each municipality has a tourism component, and so we work really closely with a lot of those folks. Also spoken at tourism conferences and things of that nature. We work with, in our Governor's Office of Economic Development, there's a strong Main Street partnership, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Main Street partnership. So we work with them, and that's also a real draw in creating some community-driven spaces and places that can be great for tourism driving as well. So yeah, those would be a couple examples from my point of view.
And George?
So since 2012, I think I mentioned before, the Arts Board holds one of its quarterly meetings wherever the Wisconsin Governor's Conference on Tourism is. And I say that because not only our great staff, but our 15 board members fan out across the conference and talk tourism and arts with everybody. And so I think over time, I continue to build our reputation across the state as the place to go for information and connection related to the arts. And so we'll work with destination organizations across the state to talk to them about, hey, they want to do a mural or they want to do an event, or how do we really take full advantage of the cultures of our place? And so we help with that. An example of how we've worked with Destinations Wisconsin over time is back in the early 2000s when we were trying to get the film incentives instated in the state of Wisconsin. We also didn't have but a state film office, so we created a nonprofit film office. And the way that that worked was in connection with Destinations Wisconsin. So if somebody called and said, hey, I need a covered bridge and I need it to look like this, do you have one of those somewhere? The question would go out among destinations across the state, and then they'd come back with pictures or video or whatever it was that was necessary to share with the filmmakers. And so it was a great example of how it could be mutually beneficial, because as the tourism folks realized, if we get them to come to our community, they'll stay, the filmmakers will stay, they'll stay in our hotels, they'll eat in our restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another example of how we've worked both directions and across the state with the destination organizations.
Absolutely. We have a question here in chat since we're on the topic, for Gary here, asking about how did Texas develop their relationship with the Tourism Industry Association, and is there a focus area within the association for arts and entertainment? Have they been successful in advocacy efforts for the arts and entertainment sector?
It's been in existence. The relationship has been there, even it predates me, and I've been here forever. So I think part of that is because it's in statute that we have this memorandum of understanding, these state agencies that have to partner together on tourism. Even in our Appropriations Act, we have one appropriation for arts grants, one for arts education grants, and another appropriation for cultural tourism. So it's kind of embedded in our organization, our agency. So it was just a natural to work with the other professionals that work in the travel industry. And when I say they advocate on our behalf, they don't get up and testify for us so much, but they work behind the scenes using their lobbyists, and they always endorse whatever our appropriations request is. And yes, we've been, knock on wood, because we're in the middle of session right now. The last couple of sessions have been very successful for us.
That and tourism, the Tourism Federation of Wisconsin has as one of its members Create Wisconsin, so our state advocates. And so it's great to have somebody in there swinging and bringing forward arts policy, so that the innkeepers, the restaurant association, and all the groups that make up that federation know about what the asks are and can, to your point, Gary, take their lobbyists as they're going in and talking about other things and making sure that the arts policy is being talked about as well.
I just add also that in our governor's office is also the Office of Film and the Office of Music. And when I say music, that's more like commercial music. And so the tourism agencies and the Travel Texas, they also promote that, because again, we're all in the same boat, trying to create events and activities for people to come spend their money.
We have a little bit of time here. Just a reminder for folks, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. But George, you mentioned earlier at the top, talking about some of the relationships within the state and how they've been able to rely on the arts board. If you want to circle back on that and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand, and I think we're going to talk about the notion of relationships too. It's important that people understand, if we're going to build relationships with tourism, it's sort of ask not what tourism can do for you, but what you can do for tourism. because I think what we lose sight of as our part of the industry is that there are many other parts of the industry that are asking for their time and attention. Again, innkeepers, restaurateurs, destinations, and so on and so on. And so if we are to sit back and say, well, come to us at some point, we're not going to be able to be successful. But if we say, and I think Gary, you said it before, we got pictures, we got video, we've got all this stuff related to the arts. How can we be of service? That's one. And then, of course, as I say, communities want murals. How do they get it done? If they've never done it before, what other communities have done what they're trying to do? How do we connect them together? So us as an information source, as a connector of organizations is really important. But as I say, I think we need to be ready to offer to tourism. Well, first of all, find out what it is they need. And then second of all, figure out what we have that we can offer to them.
One of the things I failed to mention, which I think is really, I don't know if it happens in your states, but we will go and do a tourism assessment with our partner agencies. So someone from agriculture, someone from historical, the Arts Commission, economic development, and we'll go to a community and they'll show us all the assets, and then we'll write up a report and share with them of what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so I think that's a really great partnership that we have that benefits communities.
Thanks, Gary. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat for a second. I do want to get to the question that comes up in all these kind of panels, which is if you had advice for a state considering establishing a deeper relationship with their tourism or travel colleagues, what are some tips you might offer? What about you, Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think one, if you have to kind of reach out and build that relationship. You'd have to maybe take the first step if you're not connected. Find out who the key players are and reach out and start to build that. I think that internal advocacy and building that case for support. The team here has talked about the data. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis data. I don't know if any of you do the AEP 6 data or 7 data that's coming up with Americans for the Arts, or your own data collection on the correlation between arts and tourism. But those are really great tools. We just started, interestingly enough, being in this connection that we have, a resident sentiment on tourism and arts and culture in our museums. And we're parsing through that data now, but it's really interesting to see what the local sentiment is towards these activities. And some they see, in many ways, they see tourism as a negative, and some they see arts and culture as a positive, and museums as kind of neutral. It's been really interesting. We're still, like I said, parsing that data, but figuring out ways that you can have and use data to help with your case for support in that relationship. And I think that's going to be a couple of points of my advice would be is one, reach out and tell your story and how the arts councils really do drive tourism and affect arts and culture and creativity throughout the state. And then looking at what tools you have to help tell that story.
Thanks, Tony. George?
Yeah, I think in addition to what I said before about asking what they need and helping to deliver it, I think another piece of it is our development versus marketing piece. So 2 examples quickly. A convening superpower is what all of us have as state arts agencies. And so we brought together the state's 13 art museums who had talked one-on-one to each other, but never really as a group. We brought them together. They start the conversation. We keep nurturing the conversation. And ultimately, they turn to tourism for a joint effort marketing grant to market Wisconsin's art museums. Because up until that point, you may not have even known that there were 14 art museums in the state of Wisconsin. And so by helping to convene them and bring them together, that's one example. Another example is working with the University of Wisconsin-Madison on the creation of the Wisconsin Science Festival. So explaining the arts through the sciences and the sciences through the arts, not just at the University of Wisconsin, but throughout the state. And again, that ability to convene, to show that imagination, creativity, and innovation are so important going forward, to help animate that. And then, in fact, to have it all over the state, throughout the days in October when it exists. And again, when the science festival was then up and running, they could turn to tourism and say, here we are, we need your help to reach out beyond the borders of the state to bring people in. So never forget, we have that particular superpower that others may not have.
Gary, words of advice?
Yeah, I don't really know that I have much to add other than just recognize that we are who we are, and all of these other travel industry entities are much larger than us. And so, we should focus on what we do really well, and that is create arts experiences for tourists. And just remain focused on that, and that's our contribution to the tourism field.
If I could just build on that too, Gary.
Please. Yeah.
What I really like about that is, and I have it in my notes here too, is, ensuring that our state artists and organizations are really being seen for their work and can have that visibility. So if you're doing a public call, make sure that whoever is doing that public call for a tourism project, for example, is considering and thinking and using and has visibility to your state's artists that do that work. I think that's a really great way that you can impact and affect what most of our missions are, which is to ensure that everybody in our state receives all those benefits, but we're promoting our artists and our arts organizations through these tourism opportunities. And oftentimes these tourism entities don't know who these folks are, and we can be a real provider of that information.
I also wanted to mention, a couple of years ago, the then Secretary of Tourism invited the composer director Eric Whitaker to come be a keynote speaker at the conference on tourism. Now, if you're a tourism industry person and you look on the page and it says composer and conductor, you say, why is this person coming to keynote at the conference on tourism? And then he did it. And they all went, leadership. It was all about leadership. And so when we think about what we're doing, we have ways to integrate our message within the tourism message in ways that may not even be thought of yet.
I do have one final question here from the chat. And it is, do you ever need to advocate your tourism department for the more rural destinations or work with the more rural areas to bring in more tourism? Anyone wants to take a stab at that?
So here again, we've nurtured, for example, a group that's called the Worm Farm Institute that many of you may have heard of, called the Farm Art Detour, where art is placed on the farms, and it's a way to both see how food is grown, that it doesn't just appear in the grocery store, but it actually has something to do with the farm, but also to have the art there to lure people out. Again, we nurtured that organization for a lot of years, and tourism then becomes part of the marketing of that opportunity. And since 1992, the Arts Board has been laser focused on making sure people understood that the arts exist outside of Madison and Milwaukee. So we're able to turn back to our colleagues, and because they have people on the ground, those regional tourism specialists, they can also come to us and say, here's what's going on in this rural space. Is there a way, Arts Board, you can help them? And that doesn't necessarily mean money, but it could mean technical assistance and whatever. So yes, this is an agency that understands, our tourism agency understands that the arts and tourism take place well outside of Madison and Milwaukee, especially because they're known as Illinois State Park, or that place where wind, water, and fins and feathers are all about what that outdoor recreational tourism is. So it is a rural conversation, but not everybody's going to hunt, not everybody's going to fish in that party. So they have to be able to do some of the things we deliver.
Travel Nevada has done a great job with actually focusing on the rural entities. Las Vegas and Reno Tahoe are their own really strong marketing arms, big budgets, large campaigns. And I think Travel Nevada does they support them as well, but Travel Nevada does a really great job of supporting those rural destinations and places. And so I think that's really good. And I think that aligns so nicely with the our state arts agencies, in that we're often really out there supporting those rural communities as well in deeper ways than our larger spaces. So it's really great synergy in that. And certainly if your tourism department isn't focusing on your rural communities, there are probably lots of ways that they could look at certainly what Travel Nevada is doing to highlight the value and importance of that.
Gary, George, and Tony, I wanted to give each of you an opportunity if you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up for the session today.
I'm good.
If you're good, Gary, I'm good. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank each of our panelists and have a great afternoon, everyone.